What was the dumbest mistake your incompetent coworker ever made? I worked for a landscaping and cleaning company. We had an almost toothless 60-year-old Serbian man who had fled the Civil War and spoke very little English. The owners felt sorry for him because he seemed vulnerable and was trying to support his family. At the same time, he constantly did strange and unbelievably stupid things. For starters, one of the employees had placed a plastic owl on the roof. This guy, whom we will call Bozo, was convinced for a long time that the owl was real and that it had cursed the entire property. I tried to explain that it was made of plastic, but he still flinched every time we walked past it. One day, I found pieces of the owl scattered all over the property and saw our boss yelling at Bozo for bringing a hunting rifle to work. Then there was the ride-on floor scrubber. It had to be cleaned regularly because dirt would build up inside it. If you did not clean it, the machine stopped cleaning and started spreading grime across the floor, leaving dark streaks everywhere. Naturally, Bozo never cleaned it. While I was mowing the lawn, he used the scrubber and turned a slightly dusty floor into a swamp of filthy sludge. One of the owners saw it on the security cameras and stormed out of the office, shouting, "If all of this is not cleaned up by tomorrow, do not even think about coming back to work." Finally, the other owner's wife felt sorry for Bozo and decided to do something kind. She went through her husband's wardrobe and gave Bozo several old suits and jackets so he could look respectable at church and formal events. Bozo started wearing the suits to work. Remember, he was a cleaner and landscaper. One day, I arrived and found him riding a lawnmower in an old tweed jacket. The owner walked over to me and said, "You know, I think that is my old jacket." As far as I know, Bozo still works there. I supervised a security team at a coastal construction site that required round-the-clock patrols. I managed the day shift, and my friend managed the night shift. The construction crew was doing dredging work, so we had to keep 2 security guards near the shoreline to prevent random people from entering the work zone. Imagine a square section of beach with a guard positioned at each corner. One night, one of our guards disappeared, and every call to his phone went straight to voicemail. It turned out that at 2 in the morning, he had unfolded a chair on the sand and fallen asleep at his post. An hour later, the tide came in and soaked him. His phone and everything in his pockets were ruined. He woke up completely drenched and simply walked home without telling anyone. I do not think he was even formally punished. He was already humiliated enough. He was later fired after driving a company ATV off a sand embankment and getting it stuck. One of my employees missed a meeting at 9 a.m. When I asked why, he replied, "You said the meeting was at noon, not 9. I was completely confused. The invitation clearly said 9, and the entire team knew the meeting was at 9. He sent me a screenshot of his calendar. His entire calendar was set to the wrong time zone. This was not exactly a mistake, but I once watched the head accountant, who was also the only accountant at our small company, enter 2 numbers into Excel, pull out a calculator, add the numbers on the calculator, and manually type the result into a 3rd cell. It turned out that she had been working this way for years, even though some of her spreadsheets contained 1,000 rows. I showed her how to use formulas and copy them down a column. A few months later, I saw her doing everything the old way again. This happened at school, not at work, but the level of incompetence was too impressive not to share. One student tried to use the teacher's computer to find the answers to our next test. He did this during class. It was a science lesson. The teacher had a separate supply room where her laptop was located. While she was teaching, he slipped into the room. The computer was connected to the projector. The teacher and the entire class watched everything he did on the large screen. This genius opened File Explorer and literally typed the word "test" into the search bar. I worked at a golf course one summer, and the property was covered in poison ivy. Whenever we encountered it, we were required to stop working and put on full protective equipment, including a suit, respirator, and safety glasses. 2 idiots decided to use string trimmers on the thickest patch of poison ivy I had ever seen without wearing any protection or masks. I drove over, saw what they were doing, and pointed out that they were literally spraying toxic plant oil into the air. Both of them ended up in the hospital. They needed steroid injections because they had inhaled enough poison ivy oil to put their lives at risk. My coworker was generally intelligent, but she needed detailed written instructions for any task she did not perform regularly. She was also incredibly disorganized. One day she asked me for help. I explained the process again, and she wrote every step on a sticky note. She needed somewhere to put it, but her walls and monitor were already completely covered with notes. She found one available space on the monitor, removed the sticky note that was already there, and realized that it contained the exact same instructions I had given her the previous time. I would not call him incompetent, but his arrival at our company was certainly memorable. On his first day, our new employee somehow deleted our entire production folder from Dropbox. It contained about 25 terabytes of video, design files, and other work materials. We spent 2 extremely stressful weeks recovering everything through Dropbox support. Yes, the new employee was deeply embarrassed. Sorry, but if a brand new employee has the ability and permissions to delete that much production data on his first day, then the company is completely at fault. The company was using an insecure system such as Dropbox without proper backups or access controls. You experienced a disaster that was going to happen eventually. It was only waiting for the right moment. It is unfortunate that the new employee happened to be the person who triggered it. I have an endless list of things our completely incompetent project manager did, but the best example was when he insisted that a $3,000 shipment of fertilizer had to be delivered exactly on schedule. The supplier warned him that heavy rain was expected that day. He refused to delay the delivery. A few hours later, the entire stack of fertilizer was washed away. One coworker told me that she got lost while trying to guide someone to the accessible exit. The route was a single straight corridor with no doors on either side. I still do not understand how she managed to get lost. I also had to teach her how to make a gin and tonic 9 different times. After the 9th lesson, she still made it incorrectly. She either used the wrong ingredients or served it in the wrong glass. After that, I gave up. I worked with a guy who mowed every putting green at the golf club without installing the blade on the mower. This was not a coworker, but a classmate in my culinary course. I attend an advanced pastry class once a week. 2 weeks ago, we were making sugar sculptures from isomalt. We had to bring blowtorches so we could fuse the pieces together. Our instructor explained the isomalt process step by step and told us that after we had molded and cooled the pieces, he would demonstrate how to use the torches safely. Most of the class was still molding and cooling their pieces, but the student sharing my workstation decided that he already understood everything and could begin welding the structure without waiting for the instructor. He turned on the torch, placed his sculpture on a surface covered with plastic wrap, and started setting everything around him on fire. I shouted at him to stop, but he snapped back that he knew what he was doing. A few seconds later, the plastic ignited, and we had to grab the fire blanket. The instructor put out the fire, but it terrified everyone. He tore into the student for being so reckless. I still do not understand how the student failed to recognize the danger. I sincerely hope he chooses a career outside the culinary industry. In my introductory cooking class, where we learned basic sauces, there was a guy who regularly managed to set pans on fire. On the day of the exam, we had to cook burger patties. Naturally, he turned the burner to maximum heat, poured in some oil, and then became distracted. The oil caught fire. The room was silent until we heard a quiet, "Ow." He had grabbed the scorching hot handle. Then he tried to cover the pan with a dry towel, which immediately caught fire in his hands. The chef instructor silently walked over, took the towel, extinguished it, covered the pan with a lid, and said only, "Get out." I also once watched this guy become angry and throw a college-owned rental laptop down a hallway. When it slid across the floor and he realized how much damage he might have caused, he yelled, "Oh no!" He was in my class for only about 6 weeks, but he created enough stories for an entire book. I worked for a company that was notorious for hiring terrible recruiters, and as a result, terrible temporary employees. In the summer of 2001, one of these people arrived on a 3-month contract, and we wanted him gone almost immediately. He bragged about having several Microsoft certifications, but within a few days, we discovered that he could barely use a mouse and did not understand how scroll bars worked. We assigned him the simplest possible repetitive task. He had to open one of 20 popular websites and use a stopwatch to measure the time between pressing enter and the page finishing loading. This was part of a test for caching software. Then he had to repeat the same process on another computer running the software. The problem was that he had never used a web browser before. We had to explain that to him as well, and he was amazed by it. We could not understand how an adult in 2001 had managed to avoid learning what a browser was. By then, we knew that he had lied about his certifications, but his contract lasted 90 days, so we were forced to tolerate him. Unfortunately, he learned very quickly how to search for pornography. Instead of testing websites, he started spending his time looking at adult sites. This was during the era of Internet Explorer 5 or 6, so the computers were immediately flooded with pop-ups and malware. We repeatedly caught him doing it. He denied everything, and we had to wipe the system and reinstall Windows, only for him to do the same thing again. Then he started using the other computers in the laboratory. The man had no self-control. He made excuses like a child who did not understand computers. He claimed that the entire lab had already been infected, that the problem had existed before he arrived, or that someone else had done it. I was simply relieved that we never caught him searching for anything worse. I dreaded the possibility that we might have to review the security footage. One conversation went like this. "Were you looking at pornography again? We have told you many times that it is prohibited." "No, I was not. I can see you looking at it right now." "That is not me. There is an adult website open on your taskbar. It was always there. A pop-up from an adult site is on your screen. Someone else opened it before me." "Who?" "That hairy man with the beard." "There is no hairy man with a beard in this laboratory. Only you and I have been here." "I definitely saw him. He looks at pornography all the time." It was like dealing with a 12-year-old who had no understanding of reality. I was extremely happy when his contract finally ended. We had one installer who arrived for his shift, carrying nothing in his tool belt except a small bag of peanuts. Nothing else. He did not last long. I had a coworker who was a school behavior and academic counselor. She covered 5 schools in the district and was supposed to work at each one for 1 day per week, unless another school called her for an emergency. She regularly called the school where she was scheduled to work and claimed that she had been sent to another school for an urgent situation. One day at lunch, she enthusiastically described what was happening in her favorite television show. This was before DVRs became common, and the show aired well before the end of the school day. The principal was sitting at the table with us. He stood up, smiled, and said, "Please come to my office after lunch." An investigation showed that for several months, she had been meeting with only a few students per week. The ironic part was that the schools had received fewer complaints about her work during that time. She was a terrible counselor. I once physically pulled an intern's hand away, just as he was about to grab a live power cable with his bare hands. It was the thick cable supplying electricity to the entire building. It was energized. He insisted that it would be fine, because he planned to touch only one conductor. The senior electrician politely asked me to remove the intern from his site before the kid turned into charcoal and a mountain of paperwork. I agreed. As punishment, I made the intern watch workplace health and safety training videos for 3 straight days. One of my coworkers deleted an entire database containing millions of records. The information could not have been recreated manually. He restored a backup that was 1 week old. When the client started asking questions, he did everything possible to prove that the client was mistaken. That included lying and attempting to falsify reports and data. I am in Canada, and this was a direct violation of CASL, Canada's anti-spam law. It became a disaster for both the employee and the company. About 6 years ago, I worked at Starbucks. One day, a new employee walked up to me and asked why the water was passing straight through the coffee without changing color. He was trying to brew coffee using whole, unground beans. I still remember it occasionally and laugh. To clarify, he was new, but not that new. I had personally watched him brew coffee correctly before. I was repairing tile in the lobby of a Taco Bell. The tiles had to be set in a fairly thick layer of adhesive. A friend of my son was helping me. He was a wonderful guy, but not especially bright. We installed about 10 12-inch tiles in 2 rows and carefully leveled everything. I told him, "Whatever happens, do not step on those tiles." He replied, "Okay, boss." Then he stood up and immediately stepped directly onto the fresh tiles. We had to remove everything and start again. I worked at an electronics repair shop. We fixed laptops, desktop computers, printers, and similar devices. We did not repair televisions, although that is not important to the story. The shop was owned by 3 older men, and one owner's nephew also worked there. The owners were relaxed and pleasant. One of them was especially laid back. The nephew, however, was a complete idiot. Technically, he had more seniority than I did, but the owners trusted me much more, even though he had worked there for several years and was related to them. One day, the extremely relaxed owner had to deliver a printer to a company located 2 hours away. Testing the printer was the nephew's responsibility, so the owner asked him about 10 times whether he had tested everything. The nephew repeatedly said yes. He claimed that he had tested it moments earlier and that everything worked. Of course, he had tested nothing. The printer did not work when it was connected at the client's office. The relaxed owner completely lost his temper. The nephew was fired shortly afterward because of a long series of similar mistakes. All he had needed to do was test the printer. It would have taken 5 minutes. This happened many years ago. My coworker was drilling a hole above his head using an old heavy drill with a locking trigger. It was the type that could remain running without the button being held down. I warned him that using it that way was dangerous. At some point, the drill bit became stuck. The drill tore itself out of his hands and fell. He managed to catch the power cord, but the drill swung in an arc directly toward his groin. The spinning bit caught his pants and began winding the fabric around itself. He screamed and tried to control the drill. I ran over and pulled the plug from the outlet. By then, he was lying on the floor and still screaming. We had to cut his pants apart because the material was wrapped so tightly around the bit. Fortunately, he did not lose anything important, but he suffered multiple cuts, including several serious ones, and had to go to the hospital. He never returned to work after that. I do not know exactly what had been done incorrectly, but when my wife and I built our house, the company that installed the heating and ventilation system returned 3 months after we moved in for scheduled warranty service. The technician climbed into the attic, looked at the installation, and said apologetically, "Oh, this was Jerry's work." He immediately scheduled another crew to visit. They rebuilt approximately 90% of the entire system before the official warranty period had even begun. I have no idea what Jerry used to do, but everyone at the company apparently understood that if he had installed a system, it would almost certainly need to be rebuilt. I had a coworker who was a pilot. He managed to land an aircraft on the extreme edge of the runway, practically on the boundary line. The landing damaged part of the landing gear and bent a turbine blade in one engine. This absent-minded older idiot recorded nothing in the maintenance log and reported the incident to nobody. He simply parked the aircraft and left. The next crew did not notice the damage because it was genuinely difficult to see. They took off. During the flight, they experienced unusual problems with the left engine. When they returned, the landing gear would not lock properly. Fortunately, they managed to land and stop without killing anyone. We simply fired the pilot. The company did not report him to the regulators or submit any formal complaints about his conduct. Looking back, I should have filed the reports myself instead of trusting management to handle it. I work in an operating room. One of my coworkers once left a donated kidney, uncovered and unattended in an empty room. Thank God the organ was still declared suitable for transplantation, but this was an extremely serious mistake that should have resulted in termination. She had worked there for many years, so she received only a formal warning. Management protects the long-term employees. My vacation requests are rejected, while they can take time off whenever they want. A new nurse would have been punished much more severely for the same mistake. Imagine if the kidney had fallen off the table or something else had happened. I would be furious if I had finally received a long-awaited organ and some careless nurse ruined it, forcing me to wait for another kidney. I did not witness this personally. A coworker told me the story. During the COVID restrictions, our hotel was not allowed to accept ordinary private guests. One evening, a couple arrived and begged for a room because a major water leak had made their apartment uninhabitable. My coworker refused them. The next day, a suspicious man appeared and requested a room, claiming that he was visiting for work. He provided no evidence. He paid half the cost in cash, and my coworker did not even take a credit card. By morning, the man had disappeared. The room was completely destroyed and the television was missing. It turned out that my coworker had not copied his passport or any other identification. The name and address he provided were fake. The hotel also received a fine because she had accepted a private guest without proof that he had traveled to the city for work. Nobody will ever surpass Kathy. That is not her real name. Kathy could ruin absolutely everything. She could not give change without confusing a $5 bill with a 50. She could not wash dishes without breaking several plates. She once ordered roughly 700 liters more milk than we needed. We needed 15 liters. She flooded the kitchen 4 times and set it on fire twice. She could not be trusted to close the shift. Not alone. She could not be trusted to participate in closing at all. There were countless smaller incidents. Imagine spending ages washing a mountain of dishes. You finally finish and feel relieved, and Kathy says, "Oh, there are a few more." Then she dumps another stack on top. She could spend so much time wiping already clean tables that she never reached the actually dirty ones. If you gave her a cigarette once, she treated it like a lifetime license to take cigarettes without asking, search through your belongings, and leave a mess behind. Then, when you went outside for a smoke because Kathy had nearly poisoned someone for the 7th time that day by confusing cleaning solution with caramel syrup, your cigarettes were gone. I genuinely do not think she was lazy or deliberately ruining things so that other people would do her work. She simply could not avoid making mistakes. Imagine every possible way a task could go wrong. Kathy selected every one of them, in sequence, often 3 times. Every time she insisted that she had not known. Kathy was the most hopeless person I have ever met. Management tried to fire her more than once, and there were plenty of reasons. Every time her mother arrived and screamed at the manager. The manager would eventually say, "Fine, forget it. Just keep an eye on her." So we watched her. We literally followed her around to make sure she did not destroy anything. But eventually, you had to perform your own job. You would turn away for 15 seconds, and Kathy would already be throwing freshly baked cookies into the trash because she had decided that the tray was for stale cookies. No stale cookie tray existed. To be fair, she was actually very sweet. Wherever she ended up, I hope she has not burned the place down. I worked at a grocery store for 12 years. One day, the grocery department manager called me over the intercom to the loading dock. We had just received a delivery, and the driver had failed to use a load lock bar. This is a metal bar used inside a trailer when the vehicle is not completely full. 9 fully loaded pallets had fallen over and exploded across the trailer. My job was to photograph the disaster, while the manager called our distribution center to report what had happened. The driver lost access to the truck keys and was fired immediately. He then had to find his own transportation home, which was 4 hours away from our store. The entire time he complained that it was not his fault and that nobody could force him to buy his own load lock bar because he was an independent contractor. The man caused approximately $10,000 in damage, lost his job, and probably destroyed his chances of finding another trucking job in the state because he refused to buy a $50 piece of equipment. Even worse, he could have asked to borrow one from our warehouse. We would have gladly lent it to him and charged him only if he failed to return it. You reminded me of the new warehouse manager at my previous job. We worked at an enormous wine superstore, large enough to be a full-sized grocery store. The entire 2nd floor was used as a warehouse. This man had never worked in a warehouse before. I am not even sure he had ever done physical labor. Management still decided that he was a better choice than promoting one of the experienced employees. One of our best-selling products was Carlo Rossi wine in 4-liter jugs. It tasted terrible, but it was cheap, so we kept entire pallets of different varieties. Those pallets were extremely unstable. The boxes stuck out in every direction and were held together by a thin layer of plastic wrap and 1 strip of tape on each level. You had to cut open only the top layer. If you removed all of the wrapping at once, the entire pallet collapsed. Everyone knew this except the new manager. For some reason, he decided to unwrap the whole pallet. The fact that it was visibly becoming less stable did not stop him. I learned what had happened when a frightened supervisor pointed at the ceiling above the 1st floor. Wine was leaking through it. If you have never cleaned wet cardboard soaked in wine and mixed with broken glass, believe me, it is a nightmare. The funniest part is that he was still the warehouse manager when I eventually left the company. Thank you very much for watching. Subscribe to the channel.